So good evening, City Place Church. Everybody good? Hey, I'm really excited for tonight as we continue in week number 2 of our Everything or Love Changes Everything series. And I know that Josiah had mentioned it, and we had talked a little bit about it earlier, and most of you guys already know this, but we are so pumped about the move next week to be able to move from here at Trinity, who's been so gracious to us for the last 7 months, allowing us to meet here, allowing us to use their facilities, allowing us to do all that they have, for us to be here and now get this opportunity to move to North Lakeland Elementary School, just about 3 miles north of here, and have the opportunity to kind of set down roots in that community and at that school, and be able to love on the community, love on the school, love on all of that, and be able to help them and just be a partner with them. I cannot tell you how excited I am about that. And so we will next week, which is Mother's Day, which is kind of a cool day to me to think for us to kick loose and to do that, and to be able to be in that community on Mother's Day Sunday and say, hey, here we are. Let us love on you guys a little bit. So we're pumped about that. And so today we are in week number 2 of Love Changes Everything. And so before we dive into the scripture that I have for you tonight, I want to take you back a few years. I want to take you back. For some of you guys probably weren't even born then. Most of the room is pretty young tonight. And so I want to take you guys back to my 7th grade year, which was right around 1989, right? And so take you back to 1989. And in that time, I'm in the 7th grade, and the thing that I love the most is just playing sports. Like, I couldn't wait until after school so that I could go home and play basketball with my best friend or get a group of guys, and we were going to go play football. The thing that I loved to do the most was to play sports after school. That's the thing that I wanted to do. Like most 12-year-old boys, more than likely, right? And so I just couldn't wait to get out there and do that. But one of the other things that I loved to do so much was that I loved to play video games, right? And so some of you guys may or may not know that Nintendo had this new machine that came out, right? And you got the games and you slipped the cartridge in, and then when it didn't work, you took it out and you, right? You had to blow the dust out, and you bent the thing forward, and you stick the thing back in there because something in your breath like killed all the germs or something. I don't know. But anyways, whatever. Original Nintendo system put the game in. Well, in 1989, this football game came out called Tecmo Bowl, right? This game came out called Tecmo Bowl. And some of you guys won't even know if you saw it now. For those of you guys that play a lot of video games on your PlayStation 4 and look at Madden, if you watch Tecmo Bowl, you'd be like, what is this, right? But it had like 8 teams on it, and they couldn't use the logos. So it wasn't like the Miami Dolphins. It was just Miami. And it wasn't the Cleveland Browns. It was just Cleveland. And it wasn't the Los Angeles Raiders. It was just Los Angeles, right? But each team had a killer player. And if you picked that player, it was a touchdown or it was a sack every single time. And so there was this guy back in the day who ran the football, was a running back for the Los Angeles Raiders. His name was Bo Jackson. Maybe you've heard of him, right? And so there was like 4 plays on this whole entire game. And so like Bo had one, and this other running back named Marcus Allen had one. And no matter what you did, if you picked Bo Jackson's play, touchdown, right? They couldn't tackle you. Like, he's the fastest guy on the game. Or on the flip side, if you picked the New York Giants, they had this linebacker named Lawrence Taylor back in the day. And if you picked Lawrence Taylor as your defensive player, you could sack every quarterback, block every field goal. You could do whatever you wanted. And Tecmo Bowl was so simplistic. And it was so easy. And today, I'm on YouTube earlier today looking up videos of just it. And I was almost going to send one to Jordan and say, hey, can you throw this in? And I heard the theme music and I saw the game. And even me, who loved the game so much as a kid, cracked up because it's so horrible, right? It's so bad. But there was this thing that I just loved Tecmo Bowl. And I loved to play sports after school. That's what I loved to do the most. But my best friend growing up, whenever we would crash at one of the other's houses, whenever I would crash at his house, his parents didn't really like us playing video games all that much, even though we did some. They always wanted to play card games, or his dad wanted to play this game called Risk. Anybody ever heard of Risk, right? This game of Risk where you're going to like take over the world, right? And so you got all these strategies and all these people, and we had this huge board, and we each got areas, and there's all these rules and all these regulations and all these things. They couldn't figure out what to do and how to play, and I always got my butt kicked, right? I always lost at Risk. I'm like, dude, can we just go play Tecmo Bowl? He's like, no, we got to play Risk with my dad. And so we would play this game, and it was just all these things and all this strategy, right? You just had to think through how you wanted to take over Germany or take over this person and how you were going to take over this person. And if you've got to think too much, I'm not usually that interested in it, right? And so I just want some things that are just really simplistic, or they wanted to play these card games that were just kind of complicated. I'm still 40 years old. I'm still horrible at card games, right? My 7-year-old beats me at rummy. And so it's just one of these things where there's just so many rules and so many things to follow that they're just not really fun for me. The way that playing basketball or the way playing Tecmo Bowl or those things, when you go back to a kid, those things that you enjoyed the most, when you've got all these rules and all these regulations. And it made me think about this week about our faith walk and our view of God and how we view God and how we see God sometimes. Because early on, depending on how you came to faith and what that looks like for you, that sometimes I think we see God as this rule maker, this big person in the sky who's this big bully in the sky who tells us, who judges us and critiques us and tells us all the things that we do wrong and tells us all the things that we can't do and gives us this big long list of do's and don'ts, and there's all these things that we can't do. And so it just doesn't seem much fun to try to follow God all that well, that there is just so many rules to following God that it just doesn't seem fun. It's like me trying to play the game of Risk. Like, it's just not fun because there's just too much strategy and too much thought that goes into it. So why would I want to play this game when I could just do something more simplistic, like live my life the way that I want to? And it made me take a step back, and it made me think about this week, because I know for me, for so long, this was my view of God. Many of you guys in the room today, of course, know my story and that I didn't grow up in church and all that. But for so long, that was my view of God, that it was just too complicated to try to follow God. It was too hard to try to follow God because there was just all these rules. And the last place that I wanted to be was church, because there were all these other people that were going to tell me I had to follow these rules when they weren't following the rules themselves. And so they're just a bunch of hypocrites telling me that I've got to be perfect. No thanks, I'm good. I don't need that. And for so many years of my life, that's exactly how I viewed God. It's how I viewed His Word. It's how I viewed all those things that I needed to do, that it was just too much for me. Or maybe on the opposite of that, maybe you grew up in church. Maybe it was easy for you to follow God. Maybe it was easy for you to follow the rules. Whether you really wanted to or not, your parents just said, this is what you're going to do. And you just did it because your parents told you that this is how you were supposed to live. But at some point in your life, you probably came to a season. You came to a season in your life where you just had to figure it out on your own. You had to figure out where you fit. You had to figure out what you believed. You had to kind of own your own faith, as we used to say in my student ministry all the time. Like, we would tell our students, listen, you need to own your own faith. You can't build your faith on what I believe as your youth pastor or as a pastor. You can't believe what your parents believe as Christians. You've got to own your own faith. You've got to know exactly what you believe and why you believe what you believe. And so maybe for you, maybe you grew up in church, but at some point you went through a season in your life where you just had to figure out, where do I fit in the church and what exactly do I believe? Or maybe you sit out there tonight and you like exactly what I used to think. Like, you know what? I don't want to follow God. God is too much. There's just too many rules and there's too many regulations. It doesn't seem like much fun. It seems like it's just kind of boring, and I just don't want anything to do with it, so I'm good, I'll pass. And we just kind of move on from following God and giving God our lives and what we need to. And I think at some point that all of us have followed or have wrestled, I should say, wrestled with this tension at some point in our life. But what if we were to take a step back? What if we were to take a step back and say, okay, hey, you know what? Maybe following God isn't as bad as I think it is. What if we were to take a step back and say, hey, giving God my life and trying to follow Him and trying to follow the rules and the regulations and the things that He tells me may be better for me, that maybe following God isn't quite as bad as I thought it would be, and that maybe it's okay for me. Maybe it's not going to be as bad as I thought. What if I told you that it was going to be more rewarding for you to follow God than not to follow God? Would we be able to take a step back and say, yeah, that maybe that we agree with that? And so that following God could be as fun as playing basketball or Tecmo Bowl as a kid, or whatever it is that you enjoyed to do. That it wasn't this task for you to follow God, but it was something that you wanted to do with everything that makes you you. And so tonight we're going to look at this story and the passage that we're going to look at. We introduced this concept and this idea to you last week that love changes everything. And Pastor Jason came up from Good Life Church, and he shared this message with you guys and walked you through what love looks like and different ways that we love and how love can change our lives. And I think even tonight when we sang about it, And the idea that when we take a step back and just think about how much God really loves us. Like, I think sometimes it's easy for us to say that we love God, but when you just stop and just think about how much God really loves you, that He sent His only Son for you. Like, if you're not overwhelmed by that, if you're not overwhelmed by that thought, if you're not overwhelmed by this idea that God loves you that much that He sent His only Son to die for you, like, it just blows my mind. And I've been overwhelmed before Easter, since before Easter, just thinking about the fact that God loved me that much. And so we introduced this concept and this idea to you that about love changes everything. And here's the thing for me about love, is that I think deep down inside, we all want to be loved, right? We all want to be loved. We desire to be loved. We want that. We dream about it. We want it. We think about it all the time, right? It's something that we want, whether you're married or not married or in a relationship or not in a relationship. All of us think about, dream about, and want love in our lives. It's what we want. And sometimes we go looking for it in all the wrong places, right? There's a song right there, right? Go looking for love in all the wrong places. Some of you guys are like, what? And so, but we think about this idea that we desire and we want love so much, right? Think about all these TV shows that we have. The Bachelor and The Bachelorette and all this stuff where they're going to find their one true person on a TV show. Like, right? How many of those have lasted, right? Or if you come to my house on a Friday night and Cassie and Leslie are home, you get to watch this show called Say Yes to the Dress, right? Right? I don't quite understand the concept as the only man in my house, why women like to watch other women pick out wedding dresses and why that's romantic and sweet, and you dream about what your wedding's going to look like and what that's going to be like going and picking out these other dresses. But there's like a Say Yes to the Dress marathon every single Friday, right? So thank God Cassie and Leslie haven't come home on a Friday in a while. And so it's good, right? But we watch this TV show about this idea of watching other women buy wedding dresses because it's something inside of you thinking about their wedding day and what that wedding day is going to look like, right? And so we desire to be loved and we want to be loved. And in the passage that we're going to look at today, Jesus lays out the idea of what love really looks like for us. And He tells us not only is love the key, but that love is our marching orders. That love is what we're supposed to do. And so when we think about the concept of love changing everything, not only is it the key to every relationship in our life, starting with our relationship with God, not only is it the key to that, but it's the key to the other relationships around us. And when we think about that and when we see that, I think it changes things for us. And so if you have your Bibles tonight, I want you to turn to Mark chapter 12. And Mark chapter 12, and as you turn there, I want to share with you a little bit. You guys are probably all familiar with the four Gospels. And so you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And everybody usually has a favorite Gospel of which one they prefer to read over one over the other. For me, Mark is my favorite of all the Gospels, probably because it's the shortest and it's the most direct and the most on point, right? Mark doesn't give you a whole lot of detail. Mark just kind of tells you what's up. This is it. He even skips past Jesus' birth. Like Mark just starts with Jesus doing ministry, right? He's like, I don't have time like Matthew did to write the whole genealogy. I'm just moving right here, right? Leslie and I had the opportunity to go to another church a couple weeks ago on a Sunday morning, and we're there, and the pastor was talking about how all the Gospels were different. So if you liked movies, like there were all these different ideas for the Gospel. So Matthew was this Jewish person, Jewish man and leader, and so he gave all this history and all these details about the Jewish faith and how Jesus tied into that. So if you like history and documentary stuff, then Matthew's your guy, right? If you like Luke was a doctor, and so he gives all these different, and a lawyer, so he writes in these big long terms and gives all these long details and stuff. And how John is all about love, right? He's the one embraced and laying on Jesus' chest and all these things, and John's all about love. But he was like, if you like action films, then Mark's your guy, because he's just straight to the point and on it. And I just thought it was kind of funny when he talked about that. But in Mark, Jesus begins to, this is a familiar story that's in the other Gospels, but I love Mark's take on it. And so look with me in Mark chapter 12, starting in verse 28. And here's what it says. It says, one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, talking about Jesus and some other people. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he had answered them well, asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? And Jesus answered, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all of your strength. And the second is this, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself, that there is no other commandment greater than these. And the scribe said to him, You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one and that there is no other beside him. And to love him with all of your heart and with all your understanding and with all your strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, You are not far from the kingdom of God. Isn't that interesting? That you're not far from the kingdom of God. And after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. This is a passage that's probably familiar to most of us in the room tonight. Most of us have been in church long enough or been around enough sermons that we're familiar with this passage. And the passage starts out, Jesus has just been arguing and debating the resurrection and what the resurrection meant. If you look just a few, starting in verse 18, that Jesus is in this dialogue with these other Pharisees and these other Sadducees and these scribes and these people of the time, going back and forth with them, talking to them about the resurrection and what it really means and how they're confused about it. And they're arguing and they're debating. And this scribe or this attorney or this lawyer walks up on the conversation. And a lot of times I've heard it preached and I've heard it taught that he was asking Jesus in a condescending way. Hey, so what is the most two important commandments there, wise one, O Jesus, O Son of God? What do you think are the two most important commandments, right? But the more that I read this week and the more that I studied, and I've even taught it that way, is that he's not asking out of spite. He's not asking to be a jerk in a way, right? He's asking because he's wanting to understand and to learn a little bit more from Jesus. Whether they believed that Jesus was the Son of God or not, they believed and they respected him as a teacher, right? And so he comes up to Jesus and he rolls up on the scene and he says to Jesus, Hey, listen, I hear that you guys are disputing with one another and I'm seeing everything that you've answered them, but let me ask you this question. What is the most important commandment? What is the most important commandment of all? And Jesus says, Hey, listen, the most important is this, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I think so many times that I've heard this and so many times that I've read this passage, I've totally skipped over that verse completely. I've gone straight to the idea to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength and everything that you are, and love your neighbor. If you can do those two things, ball game, good, you're done. Let's go home. And I've skipped over the idea that, hey, listen, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. With Jesus saying, hey, listen, He's King of Kings. He's Lord of Lords. He's number one. There is no other God. Some of you guys and some of these other people around here are worshiping other gods and other idols and other altars and all these other things. But hey, I want you to know and I want you to understand from the very beginning, if you're going to begin to understand what is the most important commandment, you got to understand, number one, that God is first. And then he goes on to say, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all of your strength. One of the translations says vigor, right? Vigor is not a word that we drop a lot lately, right? You don't walk around going, man, I feel so vigorous today, right? But it means with all of your energy, with everything that you are, everything that makes you you, all of your strength, all of your energy, to love the Lord your God with everything that you are. And this week, as I was putting my message together, I came across a couple quotes that I want to read to you guys because I thought that they were really good. The first is from a guy named Matthew Henry, who is a commentator, writes a lot of Bible commentaries, was a pastor, preacher, shared a lot of stuff, and he writes a lot of commentaries, and he's got different commentaries out there that you can use. And this is one of the things that he said about that section, about loving the Lord your God with all your strength and with all your power. And here's what it says. I think it should be on the screens for you guys. It says this: loving God with all your heart will engage us to everything by which He will be pleased. That loving God with all of your heart will engage us to everything by which He will be pleased. That if we love God with everything that we are, that if we love God with everything that we have, then God will be pleased with us because He has everything from us. He has all of our devotion. He has all of our power. He has all of our energy, all of our strength, all of our focus. Everything that we have is on God. And in that, He will be pleased. I can walk around my house all the time and tell Kim I love her. I love you. I love you. But if I don't please her and I don't serve her and I don't take care of her and I don't give her my devotion and I don't give her my focus and I don't do the things that I need to do as a husband and as a father, I can tell her that I love her all day long, but she's not going to feel that love. We can walk around all day long and say, I love God. I love God with everything that I am. I mean, I'm in church, I'm serving, I'm doing all these things. I love God. But if we're not loving Him with everything that we have and we're not giving Him everything that we have, then are we falling a little bit short? That God wants us to love Him with all that we are. And here's the other quote. This comes from a guy named Saint Bernard, who was a 12th century priest at that time. And it says this: the measure of our love to God is to love without measure, for the immense goodness of God deserves all the love that we can possibly give Him. That's good. Let me read it again. The measure of our love to God is to love without measure, for the immense goodness of God deserves all the love that we can possibly give Him. But the measure of our love to God is to love Him without measure. How many times have we put stipulations on our love and our devotion to God? Well, God, if you can just do this, then I'm going to do this. If you can answer this prayer for me, then I'm going to follow you with everything that I have. If you will just do this for me, then I will be after you and I will serve you and I will give you all of my devotion and all of my strength and all of my energy. Like, God, if you can just do this for me. But St. Bernard is saying, hey, listen, the measure of our love to God is to love Him without measure. That just the true goodness of who He is. Go back to the first verse where He says, listen, the Lord is one, right? That God is God and that God is one. John, can you put it back up on the screen? Because there's a couple people writing it down. And so that the immense goodness of God deserves all the love that we can possibly give Him. He is a good, good God. And everything that we can give Him, He deserves that and so much more. And I read those quotes this week and I was just blown away by that. So as Jesus is telling these people, as He's got this group of people around Him like He always does, and He's teaching them and He's talking to them. And He says, hey, listen, here's what I want you to understand. Here's what you need to do. You need to first recognize that God is one, that the Lord is one, that He is number one. And then you need to love Him with all of your heart and with all of your strength and with all of your mind and with all of your energy and everything that you have. You need to love Him that way. And then I want you to love your neighbor as you love yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. And when we take a step back and we think about this and we put it in the context of what's happening there, and maybe you've heard this before and maybe you haven't, but not only did they have all of the Old Testament laws that they were following and trying to do, but they had all these man-made laws that they had made up as well. Like I read somewhere, like even down to how many nails they could put in their sandals. Like if you had too many nails in your sandals, then you weren't following God. You didn't love God the right way because you had too many nails in your sandals. To the point that they had like 613 laws and rules that they're trying to follow. Can you imagine walking through your everyday life, trying to follow God the best that you can? Can you imagine walking through, trying to think through 613 laws of things that you needed to do to show your devotion and to show your love to God? Like, there's just no way. Every step you took, you would make a mistake almost. There's just nothing that you can do. And so the Jewish people and the Jewish leaders at this time are locked in this idea that if they followed all of these rules and they did all of these things, that's how they showed their obedience. That's how they showed their devotion to God, because we're following all of these rules to the point that even, hey, listen, we did this burnt offering and these sacrifices and we brought all this stuff to you, which in the Old Testament time it was good, but once Jesus came, that went away because He became the sacrifice. And so that's interesting to me that even the scribe says, hey, that what you offer here, what you're saying is better than even if we were any burnt offering or sacrifice that we could bring. They're all caught up in this idea that there's all these things that we're supposed to follow. And Jesus is like, hey, let me wipe away everything that you're thinking about. Let me take away everything that you're thinking about and show you and help you understand how to take what it looks like to follow God with everything that you are and all that you have. and what that looks like for you. Let me take 1,613 laws that you're trying to do, and let me simplify this for you and show you what it is that it looks like. And when we think about it in that context, I think it blows my mind. That Jesus is saying, hey, if you will focus on me, then everything else is going to be good in your life. Because so often I think that we get it messed up. That if we could just do those two things, then everything else in our life would fall into place. Everything else in our life would be good. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have hard times. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have things that are going to happen to us. It doesn't mean that storms in life aren't going to come our way. Right? But what it does mean is that we're following the right way and we're on the right path, because so often we get off track so quickly. That it's so many times, I think sometimes we get it backwards too. That Jesus said, here's the three things. Recognize God's kingship in your life. Recognize the authority of who He is in your life. Love Him with all of your heart and with all of your strength and with all of your mind and everything that makes you. Love Him, and then love other people. And so often I think we get it all backwards. I think we just focus a lot of times, well, if I can just love other people, then everything will take. That's me showing my love to God because I'm helping these people. I'm just doing this. And we focus so much on helping other people and loving other people, which is so important, that we neglect our relationship with God. And we neglect the things that we should do. And He didn't say love God first. He said recognize His authority and His kingship in your life. Recognize that first, and then love Him, and then serve other people. And so often I think we get it backwards. Sometimes we flip things around a little bit and we focus so much on loving other people and trying to do that thing. And so if we are going to belong, or if we're going to believe and live out the idea that love changes everything, this is why I'm starting here this week, because we got to get this part right. If we don't get this part right, then the rest of the next couple weeks of this series isn't going to make much sense to you, because everything else is going to be out of whack and be out of order. That we've got to recognize and focus on these things. And so here's one thing I want you guys to know as we walk away today. Is that when we love others, we love others best. We love others best when we love God the most. And there's a quote, that is actually a quote from a guy named Kyle Idleman, who is a pastor and an author of a book. Maybe you've heard it, Not a Fan. He wrote a book called Not a Fan. He also wrote a book called God's at War. And this quote is a quote from that book. And I read that this week, and I was blown away by it. What a very simplistic thing for us to follow our lives by, to say that we love others best when we love God the most. And so tonight, as you get ready to walk away from things, I want to give you 3 things that we've already kind of talked about. 3 things to walk away from, to say, okay, hey, here's what I need to do. Because so often I think we come in and we listen to a message and we hear some things, but there's not things for us to take away. There's not this application for us to walk away and say, hey, here's what I need to do in my life. Here's what I need to do. And the first of those things is exactly what Jesus started with, to recognize and to understand the God's authority and His kingship in your life. That if God isn't first in your life, if He's not the end-all, be-all for you, if you're not recognizing who He is as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and that He is over your life, if you don't recognize that first, then the rest of it misses. The rest of it you're missing out on. You can't really love God the way He deserves to be loved if you don't recognize His kingship and His authority in your life. It's easy to say I love God, but it's different to recognize His authority and His holiness and how amazing He is, and then follow Him and then love Him. And so number 1 is for us to recognize the authority and the kingship of who God really is. The second piece that I want you guys to know and to understand is to spend time with Him. To spend time with Him. It's easy to say, man, I've got my morning devotion and I spend some time with Him, and some mornings I get to it, and man, some mornings I'm just busy. I'm as guilty of it as anybody in the room, if probably not the worst at it. That I just try to find time whenever I can to fit it in to my crazy schedule. This past 2 weeks ago, many of you guys know I got to go to Kansas City for the week to FCA training. And I work part-time with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I'm out in Kansas City at this FCA training, and they did a morning devotion every morning before the meeting started. They would sing a couple songs of worship, and somebody would come in. One of the executive leaders at FCA would come in and do a devotion. And one of the executive vice presidents walked in the third morning, I think it was, and did a devotion on excellence. And it wasn't like this boring, hey, let me tell you how to be excellent. Like this dude preached, like just preached to us. Like I was ready just to run out of the room. Like let's just go do something, like now. But in the message, he talked about being excellent. And that if we don't spend time with God, how can we be excellent for Him? And he said, so many of you guys are running to middle schools and running to high schools and trying to serve and trying to do all these things on campus and trying to do all this stuff. And you just try to fit God into some little box whenever you can, that this is the time that I have for you, God, will this work? And he said, instead of you asking yourself, when do I have time to spend time with God? Ask yourself this question. When does God want to spend time with me? And he said that to our group of about 65 people. And it just rocked me. And he was like, just stop for a minute and ask yourself the question, when does God want to spend time with me? Pray that. Ask God that question and let Him speak into your spirit and tell you when He wants to spend time with you. Because I will tell you probably 9 out of 10 times, it's before your day even gets started. To recognize His kingship and His authority, like Jesus said, before you can love Him with all of your heart, you got to recognize His authority in your life, then spend time with Him first and start your day there. Start your day there. But he's like, ask God that question. God, when do you want to spend time with me? And he's like, I promise you, He's going to give you an answer. And the third thing that I want you guys to know and to think about is about loving others. We talk about it all the time. We've said it all along. For the last 7 months, you guys have heard a couple times a service that it's not about the places we're coming or the place we're coming, but the places we're going. About sharing our faith and sharing our stories, sharing the gospel, sharing what we got. Right before service, one of you guys walked up to me and said, man, I was way out of my comfort zone this week, right? I was way out of my comfort zone this week, but one of my customers gave me the opportunity to share my faith and to share my story with him. And I was so uncomfortable, but for about an hour and a half or a couple hours, I just sat there and had this conversation with this guy and debated back and forth about what he believed and what I believed. And I just told him what you always say, that you can dispute the Bible and you can dispute a lot, but you can't dispute my story. You can't dispute what God did for me. So let me tell you what God did for me. And he had the opportunity to share that with one of the customers this week. It's not about the place we're coming, but about the places we're going. But if we can recognize God's kingship in our life, we can spend time with Him and we can love Him with everything that we are, and then we can love other people. Then when we love others best when we love God the most. That's such a powerful statement to me, to think through that and to think about the idea of changing the priorities in our lives. Because we say it a lot. Like as a pastor, I say it all the time to people, like, couples that are going through issues, and we're doing our premarital counseling or marital counseling, or people that are struggling. Like, well, how much time are you spending with God? Like, God's got to be number one in your life. If God's not number one in your life, and then your wife, and then your kids, and then the church, like that's the order of how things should be. And then I walk away going, did I spend time with God today? Is the church more important than my relationship with God? Is the church more important than my family? And it's so easy for us to get the priorities in our lives mixed up. And I just love the simplicity of Mark and the way that he presents the story of what Jesus is saying. Hey, listen. God's number one. And love Him with everything that you got. And love other people. Because we love others best when we love God most. And so as we continue in this series over the next couple weeks, I want you guys to understand that following God and loving God isn't like some complicated board game that I played when I was 12 years old. That wasn't fun and that I didn't want to have part of. That following God and recognizing His authority and loving Him and loving other people is such an easy, simple message that God gives us. And there's going to be days that it's easier than others. There's going to be days that it's going to be fun. There's going to be days that we're going to share that and we're going to be rewarded by it. There's going to be days that we're going to share and the door's going to get shut in our face and we're going to want to give up. But Jesus climbing up on a cross and dying for you, He didn't give up, and so we shouldn't give up. And so it's not about the place that we're coming, but about the places we're going. We love others best when we love God most. So I just want to ask you if you guys will close your eyes and bow your heads for me tonight.